Forget whatever you heard about social media being the root of all evil in healthcare. Today, we're going to dive into how MedTech influencers are probably the best weapon against medical misinformation online, especially on the YouTubers and the TikToks of the world, where people are just spewing their experience and it's driving people to make some poor choices. Welcome to MedTech Sunday. I'm your host, Joe Lemon. Really excited to bring my third installment. And I want to say thank you to everyone that subscribed on LinkedIn. Our newsletter's up over 1,000 subs, I guess, subscribers on LinkedIn. I guess how you say it. But it's great to see people that are interested in this type of information around what's happening in sports tech, health tech, and medical device. I've been passionate about over the years is just understanding how the word gets out, how people are educated about healthcare. Ever since I've been in medical sales, now I'm more the marketing guy. It's interesting how you can let people in and they can persuade people that are over people's health. I always found it fascinating how Big Pharma used to send out a whole bunch of ex-athletes and great-looking folks, and they would go persuade doctors to go pass out certain pills. Of course, they're FDA approved and whatnot. They weren't solely making choices off of that, but it had a big part to play. And knowing what people that are in my shoes could possibly do to impact the system is pretty profound, man. And I was kind of blown away when I found this out. But let's start off with a did you know, a fun fact, let's call it, right? So did you know that the U.S. and New Zealand are the only countries where drug makers are allowed to market prescription drugs directly to consumers? The majority of the advertising dollars go towards pharmaceutical companies that are promoting the latest and greatest pill that will help change your lives. And, it's a format that we always see. It's the cloudy skies, right? And then, there's a big dark cloud over their life, whatever's happening, they pop the pill. And then all of a sudden now they're jamming out somewhere, or they're, 88 and they're feeling great doing poolside, right? Doing a poolside aerobics. but man, only in the U.S. and New Zealand can they promote those type of things. And so much money is delivered to it that I thought it was interesting to kind of see what this Harvard article came out with. This is back in 2017. Where it was trying to warn people against how prescription drugs are advertising directly toward them, and that's not the norm. Now, I think we can have a whole conversation around whether is this good, is it bad, the pros and cons of it. I can argue either side. I see some pros from the awareness that it does drive towards certain issues that people just might not know that they're experiencing, and it lacks a lot of the education. And it tells us why we should be thinking about maybe asking our doctor about this. Go ask your doctor campaign. It's a big deal, right? Those work really well, but it doesn't really necessarily educate people on if this is for you or not. And that's where, unfortunately, a lot of people are left up to their own devices, and they're left up to social media to go figure out when's the right time to engage their certain healthcare provider or put pressure on them to really go prescribe a certain drug. And I think this is a big part, let's say, enter into MedTech influencers, how they can really combat some of this misinformation, because it requires sometimes more than a 30-second snippet or a 15-second snippet about how great your life's going to be after popping a pill. There's a lot of data going around, so people are just eating away the actual trust. Ever since COVID, I would say a big drop-off in the amount of trust people have of what's coming from the government, coming from other enterprises, coming from even healthcare providers, right? Because people were really confused about how to manage the whole pandemic. And I'll avoid talking too much about that. But I will say this, though, is that the whole state of healthcare misinformation is real. So I came across some other cool information as well, where it talks about how misinformation has impacted people's choices so much so. Even younger demo, I would say, between the 18 and 34, this one report found that 54% of young adults were taking advice from non-medical sources, and compared that with 25% over 55 and up. And so, a lot more skewed towards the younger adults because they're online. That's where they get their media, right, and get their information. So no surprise there. But this part was what I found was interesting. And this is a report that came out about healthcare and trust. And it said 4 out of 10 regret that health decisions based off misinformation. Now, this is where it gets interesting to me, because I think so many people are looking back and they're regretting some of these choices. I welcome in this healthcare influencer, and this is done through collaboration. And I think this is just a good place for us to start talking about some of the solutions around how we can change some of these narratives and help elevate how people go about taking care of themselves. And so that whole like piece about having regret is a real thing. If you boil it down, the regret factor of 47% of young adults versus 17% of older adults that made choices based off of misinformation leads to like people trying to self-diagnose physical and mental health issues, get into like people coming off medications too early, or maybe not walking themselves off of that. That can cause some real challenges for them. But just totally disregarding whatever your medical health provider has to say, man. I think it's not that we need to just disrespect health providers, but we need more allies. We need more credible sources to help, unwind and really dive into some of this, into a lot of the science, really. And so this is what I'm noticing for healthcare influencers, right? There's a rise of MedTech influencers. I did a whole video about how you can really start creating content, especially in this capital equipment, medical device space, where you can partner with other people. I'll get into that further. There's a real growing need for this, and MedTech companies are looking for that. And so if you want more information about how to create content with folks, check out my previous YouTube video. I'll put the link in the actual show notes below. And I love the fact that people are sharing their experience. If they're taking a certain medication, they've had a certain treatment done, and they just want to share how they're feeling. This all user-generated content. Most medical marketers are going to prescribe that the actual doctors go out and get those testimonials, and that's going to generate some of that user-generated content. It's good for everyone to know if they're having positive impacts. It still doesn't explain why and if it's for you to take in detail. It's just a testimonial. It's a blurb. It's a before and after picture on weight loss. Doesn't mean that you should do every fad diet that comes along. So I want to get into some real strategies about how MedTech influencers can combat misinformation. Foremost one is, if you're creating content, get with the manufacturer, get with the person that made the actual drugs, get with the enterprise of the company that's actually making that medical device, and understand what it is FDA cleared for, understand how healthcare providers are using it off label, because that's a whole separate thing, right? That happens a lot. But get educated so you can go about understanding when's the right time to actually use this different device, this therapy, whatever it may be, and then understand what it was made for, right? I think understanding what it was made for and what it was cleared for is important. Doesn't mean you have to only do what it was cleared for, because I know globally certain products are used and cleared for a lot of different things over in Europe that are not going to be FDA approved here in the U.S., at least for quite some time. Doesn't mean that's a bad product. Doesn't mean that you can't use it off label, but it's just good to be in the know, right? Engaging the right healthcare expert, get with somebody that can break down the science, that understands it, not just in a theoretical talking point, but get with somebody that can sit down and walk you through how certain things impact the body, understand what some of those negative side effects that could possibly take place. So you're not caught up in this allure of all the possibilities that can come from using XYZ drug or different therapy out there. And I think it's even great for more content that's done around debunking myths and misconceptions, addressing some of these things head on, going beyond the headline reading. A lot of times we see this big headline and we don't come back to that story, let's say 3 to 6 months later after more information is found out. Nobody goes back to those studies a lot of times and understands, whether that was a quality study or not. So partnering with somebody that's evidence-based, research-based, and they can look at these different studies with you, I think it's just so important. This is what I've been spending more time doing on my actual show, especially if you go to the rehab lab. We would talk to more veterinarians more so about what they're doing with shockwave therapy, but it's great to get their opinion about what is happening in the industry. So you can go check out some of those episodes. But I think a lot of this really comes down to bridging that gap between the advice that you're getting from maybe your healthcare provider, which, they're going to have way more detail about your situation. So I'm always going to say, listen to them first and then start to dissect that before you just go online, and bridging that gap between what you're hearing online. There's a way to sit side by side with healthcare providers and people that are creating content and help you really try to forge the best path for yourself. So with that being said, man, at the end of the day, this all comes down to collaboration over everything. I think this is really how we get there. There's a lot of ethical issues coming up in the future around this as well. Is it responsible? Should we continue allowing this type of marketing tactics of like influencer marketing around certain drugs and some of the misinformation that can come from user generated content? Because patients, a lot of times, I'm saying user generated content, but they're just patients that had a good experience, hopefully talking about it, and they might be getting compensated. Like as any other influencer, for awareness doesn't replace education. Like, I think about awareness as just, you have to have that, but the education comes right below that before you think about trying to engage in taking that extra therapy or that drug, right? So, man, it's great for awareness. Go out, get that information. But I think there's going to be a lot of ethical concerns that come out and different laws that will be rolled out because information travels so fast on social media. You aren't able to vet it. You aren't able to really see what's real. And this is why I'm calling for more MedTech influencers to stand up and start making content. Man, if you want to see about how about going about doing that, check out my previous video about MedTech content creation I did a couple months back, but I think it applies more now than ever. I would love to get your thoughts on this whole idea of having more MedTech influencers or influencers getting involved in healthcare. Are you support it? Are you against it? But right now, I see this as the greatest weapon against misinformation online. With that being said, man, look forward to having you guys back next week on MedTech Sunday. Please, if you haven't already, go subscribe to it on LinkedIn. And until next time, I'll see you guys on next week's edition of MedTech Sunday.